I'm just thinking about free will and determinism. I mean, my own position on that is, if it's the right word, I mean, I don't even have a position on it, but my suspicion there is that, you know, these terms, free will and determinism, and the ideas that power those terms, the sense that we can imagine doing things differently, we can imagine visiting the past, all of the circumstances being the same, and then making a different choice. You know, those kind of understandings of free will. It seems to me that all those are based on a kind of cognitive misunderstanding of some kind. You know, our brains are relatively simple, well, they're not really complicated organisms, but the understanding that those brains get up to is often relatively simple. And my guess would be that when we think about time, and free will and determinism is ultimately about time, isn't it? About what's happening in the future, and what, to the extent that what we do now can affect what happens in the future, those kind of things. Since it's, you know, intimately bound up with ideas of time, and the fact that we don't really understand time literally, we understand it metaphorically through an understanding of space, that understanding, that misunderstanding at the cognitive level throws up all kinds of artifacts. You know, because we imagine time as space, we can imagine going back in space, like I go up that path a bit and taking a different route through it. You know, everything else stays the same, but I can imagine I think it's those kind of, as I say, cognitive misunderstandings, not lacks of intelligence or anything like that, but just the intimate way that our wiring is working that throws up intuitions which are just wrong, really. That's my suspicion of it. It's just speculation. I don't know. Might be wrong. But one of the things I've noticed about the way that free will is discussed, and that determinism is discussed, particularly determinism actually, is that some people, and probably myself at times, when talking about determinism, kind of make exceptions, kind of determinism light or a partial determinism, let's say we for now, that we might accept determinism. We say, yeah, everything is as it is. All you can do is just observe it, as if we had a choice about whether to observe it or not. You know what I mean? So it's not. So we make an exception to the deterministic flow of the universe by pretending that we have a special kind of role in that, even if it's a passive role. But it's somehow outside the deterministic flow, or sometimes even the kind of recommendation for how we should feel about it. Yes, everything is determined, every atom in the universe is on a destined journey that was set at the Big Bang, and there's nothing we can do about that. All we can do is accept that. All we can do is just be sanguine about it. You know what I mean? That's like taking a certain kind of emotional stance towards it, as if we had a choice of what emotional stance to take. As if we had a choice, taking that view, that we even had any say in what words we were going to say, or what kinds of information we were going to gain, and what information we were going to share. As if we had any choice about having these second order thoughts about it and communicating them via the camera to the internet. Do you know what I mean? It's almost, we make these little exceptions. Yes, everything's determined, you've just got to go with the flow. Everything's determined, you just have to accept it. Everything's determined, there's no point in trying to change it, you might as well just make the decision to be passive in the face of it. You know, these are all exceptions, aren't they? Determinism Lite. It seems to me that, two things actually. The first thing is that if there is a deterministic universe, and this is just part of a river that's flowing through the, you know, kind of like a river just going through its processes, and its destination is known at the start, and we are part of that, and, you know, our destination is known from the start, and every move we make, every neuronal firing we engage in is all part of that, then we would have to say that determinism is a peculiarly, the idea of determinism in this pattern of activity called the human brain is a particular one, because it's accompanied by another pattern. It's accompanied by a pattern which recognises this, which we call the recognition of determinism, and it would also be accompanied by another pattern called the recognition that that determinism recognises itself. You know, there's a little kind of feedback loop, seems to me, just is kind of formed in that. You can't just have determinism; it has to be in the human brain. It has to be accompanied by these layers of realizations. And the other thing is, I can't remember what the other thing was. I'll have a think and just show you these what I'm thinking. Somebody's woven these plants into... Of course, this all happened at the Big Bang. You know, in the Big Bang, this first microseconds, nanoseconds, femtoseconds of the universe, a pattern was put into place in which some humans would walk through a forest in Cheshire and weave plants as yet unimagined in the mind of the universe into this particular pattern. Makes perfect sense. Anyhow, what was the second thing? I was going to talk about that. Free will, determinism. No, I can't get it. Sorry about that. That can't be very important, could it? I know people do talk about compatibilism, but I don't think that's any kind of a solution, really. I think that's just another artifact, another piece of cognitive shadowing of reality, another kind of construction to try to make sense of the world. I don't know. Beautiful down here today, though, isn't it? I'll show you the sky. Look, God's very own cathedral. Okay, I remember what this second thing about determinism was I was going to talk about, which was to do with language. And because there's lots of things in our language and the way we talk to one another which have determinism built in, don't they? You know, every time we use a word like try, I'll try, that's assuming a kind of an unknown quality about the future. I might succeed, I might not. There's two possible realities, and what I do will affect which one of those realities I'm going to. I'll try. But of course, if you're deterministic, then that's not acceptable. Trying, do or do not, according to what the universe dictates. There is no try. Other things like, you know, hope or fear, any relationship to an unknown future, which, you know, it's unknown because we assume that it can go several different directions. This horrible thing might happen, it might not. I'm just frightened of it. But if we are accepting determinism, then there's no need to get into that kind of, I don't know, it's just those words like that, I think, play into and support and kind of our own internal sense of having some agency and free will about the whole thing. So try, any of those nouns, those verbs I just mentioned. Yeah, words like, any kind of activist terms, you know, any kind of words associated with political action, change. Let's go out and man the barricades, and then we can change the world. Let's take to the streets and have a revolution and overthrow the government, with the assumption that, just to say those things couldn't happen, but the language around it, which is to do with agency. I decide to do something, you decide to do something, we can make a collective decision as autonomous agents with free will, and because of our actions and because of that agency, we make a political change in the world around us. I mean, that's all built into the idea, isn't it? The free will is built into that idea. So all those activist terms like change and transformation and revolt and those things would have to change. I'm suggesting there has to be an overall, an overhaul. Yeah, let's say overhaul of language completely. There would have to be, including phrases like there would have to be, an overhaul of language which eradicates those things, or those things just kind of fall out of favour. They start to be nonsense. Those words start to sound like luminiferous ether to us, or they start to sound like the speech of ghosts or language of spirits and angels. It starts to sound like that, like angelic. And we think, what do you mean try? And we'd have another word for it by then, of course. And because these things are inevitable, because determinism is, if determinism exists, if that's the way it is, and why not, then that's kind of bound to happen, isn't it? We should imagine we should see those linguistic changes starting to happen, and the thought processes which accompany those changes, and we'll kind of feel ourselves moving towards a language environment, speaking and listening environment, in which different kinds of ways of addressing one another are brought out, and different ways of the world moving through us in the form of language starts to come into being, which is better reflective of that dawning of a recognition of determinism. Because along with determinism arising as an idea in the human mind, these other things have to arise necessarily, including the idea perhaps to do with moving into that world. So in that logic, I think we're kind of bound to see that. And it'll probably be better, I don't know. Maybe it'll be better, maybe it'll be worse. But we won't be able to say things like, maybe it'll be better, maybe it'll be worse. Because the idea that there are two possible things ahead of us, and anything we do might change that, or anything that we say hasn't already been scripted, will be kind of unsayable. It'll sound really archaic, it'll sound like Chaucerian English. And a light between the trees.